just kind of wait and see what we get in the room here tonight.
And I didn't finish the minutes from the last meeting, so we won't be voting on minutes today. So I think
And I
we'll
don't think,
probably just take
then you know what, then
attendance.
a quorum, we're not voting on anything, so then a quorum won't be necessary. I noticed that was absent from the agenda you sent out. I was like, oh, did I miss something here?
Oops. Oh, we'll have a round, 2 rounds next meeting to vote on.
Yeah, that's fine. I think we'll be okay. We'll still note attendance. I was involved with an email exchange with Ray. Give her a minute to get in the room. Dr. Lawler, hello, welcome. Are you all set? Terry, good, you got your slides. Are you sharing screen and managing? Do you need any logistics there, or are we good?
Haley and I have already coordinated. I'm going to manage my own screen.
All right. Dr. Peebles, welcome. Good to see you, as always.
Hey, Dr. Menzer, it's good to see you as well. Nice to be here. I do not have slides. I am just the Q&A guy, so I will unmute my mic accordingly and
Great.
dance.
Appreciate that. I mean, I know you like to have the numbers on the screen. I remember the last meeting. You were sufficiently wowing people with numbers that I thought you were going to glaze them over. So you rocked it out. We'll see what happens this time without the slides.
Today, I'm only doing what Haley asked me to do, so I didn't want to oversell it. So I know you guys are only one piece of a large agenda, so I will act accordingly.
Love it. I love it. Good to hear. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, sir. It's good to see you as well.
Yeah. All right. Since we do it, we have one person on the phone. If that person who's calling in could kind of identify themselves so we know if you're a member of the work group or not for attendance purposes. We'll circle back then, I guess, with that person, Haley.
This is Kim Klein from the Department of Education.
Oh, all right. There we go. All right. Thank you, Kim. All right. I don't want to hold this up too long. I'm going to give it another minute or two for Ray to get in the room, because then we have a presentation and a Q&A around that presentation, then a Q&A with Dr. Peoples, and then talk about our path forward, and then public comment. Those of you who are regular attendees, or those of you who are members of the work group, generally know our format runs in that sequence. We try to be mindful of everyone's time, but also respectful that we're receiving, in this case, a presentation that I think will be highly informative and engaging. And then the conversation in the second half of the meeting is really a springboard for us into the February meeting and the primary discussion. So that said, I don't see Haley. Did Ray get in the room?
I don't think I see her yet. I was going to shoot her a quick email with just the link again.
Okay.
And I'll let you know.
Happy New Year to you, Yvette. Good to see you. So at this time, just for the record, while we're waiting, we'll do a roll call. Just type your name in the chat if you're a member of the work group. Oh, there's Ray. Happy New Year, Ray. Good to see you. We will, let's do a roll call attendance in the chat. If we just type our names in, and then we will, we'll get started with our first presentation.
This is Roger. I'm on the road, so I can't really put my name in the chat, but okay. I am here.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate that. Dawn, do you have the same challenge? I know you thought you were going to be maybe traveling. If you'd like, we see you on the screen, and I knew you were going to be driving.
I am here.
Okay, great. All right.
I'll add Roger on behalf of Nemours.
All right. Thank you very much, Yvette.
Yep.
All right. That said, we wanted to keep with our theme of educating and informing our work group, specifically around the activities related to the recommendations that we made to the governor and the legislator and the full body consortium last year. And so our presentation is going to flow with Dr. Lawler, providing a view of how we're bridging a statewide culture of care in our schools. And then we're going to pick up with a conversation we had previously around data as it relates to the data dashboard that we recommended to the consortium. And then we will talk a little bit about our path forward in our next meeting. That said, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Lawler. She's going to engage and enthrall us with a dynamic presentation. So,
Jeff,
the floor is yours.
as you're turning the floor over to Dr. Lawler, I do have a brief introduction. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New
Dr.
Year.
Lawler, can you hear me?
Yep.
Dr. Lawler is a psychologist. She recently earned her doctorate degree from Wilmington University, so we want to congratulate her on that. She's been leading the trauma-informed practice work and in social emotional learning in the state of Delaware for quite some time. She's presently with the Delaware Department of Education. She's the founding member, trainer, and curriculum architect for Delaware Compassionate Schools Learning Collaborative. And prior to her joining the Delaware Department of Education, she served for 26 years and 3 months in the Red Clay Consolidated School District. Those 3 months are important to note. So again, we welcome you, and we're turning it over to you, Dr. Lawler.
Thank you. Like those 3 months were important to me too. I want to thank you all for the opportunity. Let's see if I can share my screen.
Terry, we definitely see your screen.
We see your
Oh,
slides.
you're able to see my slides. Great.
Yes.
We do
All
see the
right.
slides.
There we go. So let's get into slideshow mode. Okay. So as Ray shared, the work that I'm going to share with you all is related to building our statewide culture of care. And we really think of this work as work designed to bridge hope and opportunity for all of our students, but for our students who have experienced trauma and toxic stress in particular. What is really unique about this is that for some time, over the last 10 years, the national data has suggested that trauma and toxic stress was really at health crisis levels. And the last year has made that really exacerbated that statement. And so what we have attempted to do in Delaware is really celebrate the fact that, one, we feel like we've been on the cutting edge of this research and have advocated really in a grassroots way from the ground up to make sure that these supports were dispersed throughout the state. And so I want to begin, first of all, by thanking DSCA and the Office of the Child Advocate for their advocacy in this area, because that's really what got the work started in a number of our Wilmington schools in particular. And then we're using that as a framework to scale up across the state. And so our early data suggested that about 51% of Delaware students had experienced at least one adversity. And so in a typical classroom, that might reflect the information on this graphic. So that might look like about 6 students in a group of about 30 who have experienced no adversities, 5 having experienced at least 1, 6 having experienced 2, and then the other 13 students in the classroom having experienced from 3 to 6 plus adverse experiences over their lifespans. That's concerning because we know that the brain, as the center of what happens in the body, is processing that information. And when the brain's ability to cope has been overwhelmed, whether through a lack of social supports or not having the strength that it needs to respond in an adaptive way to that particular traumatic event or ongoing experience of adversity, the potential for disruptions that impair brain development, physical development, emotional and behavior development, and start that trajectory that impairs or impedes the health and lifespan takes place. And so for that reason, we want to make sure that every one of our young people have access to proper coping skills, the ability to regulate themselves so that they can go on to live purposeful and passionate and productive lives. We pay attention to toxic stress because we know that stress, vicarious stress in the workplace really impedes, it motivates teacher turnover, it impedes our ability to be as effective at the job as we would like. We've got data across the country that suggests that new teachers are leaving the profession in droves within the first 5 years as a result of stress and feelings of disappointment that they're not able to do the work that they've trained to do. We also see similar data in administrators. And so with that in mind, we want to make sure that we are mitigating burnout for our workforce so that we can retain a strong workforce. Most importantly, though, there's research that says that stress is contagious. We have mirror neurons in our brains. And so when you're in the presence of people who are experiencing high levels of stress, you tend to take on that same temperature, so to speak, in your own emotions. And there's research that suggests that teachers who are experiencing high levels of stress have students who have higher markers for cortisol, and cortisol being a stress hormone. And so if you think about this in relation to the work that this committee is charged with, when we are experiencing those floods of cortisol, those floods of negative emotions, that is what starts the challenges, the physical cascade that later contributes to shortened lifespan and early disease systems. So in 2018, October of 2018, Governor Carney signed Executive Order 24 in hopes of making Delaware a trauma-informed state. Again, you'll notice here, we've got lots of state agencies represented. Sadly, there are no educators here. We were all busy working, but we had really been on the forefront of a lot of this work and getting that order signed so that we could expand services throughout our state systems. A month later, I got recruited from Red Clay to join the work and support the scale up. And the earliest days of my start that November were focused on looking at, just what would become our state strategic plan. I had to develop the plan, but really needed to look internally as well as outwardly to assess whether or not we exhibited a certain level of readiness. And one of the things I realized is that the work was really twofold. We had work that needed to be done within the Department of Ed, as well as our outward facing work to support the districts. In addition to that, I think if we add on a third level, it included how do we integrate all of this work so that it really reduces and ultimately eliminates the barriers to learning, those non-academic barriers that interfere with kids being successful in school. And so from there, our state's trauma work for schools was born. And so this document, this graphic really became sort of our guiding, our compass, so to speak. We want to build on a foundation of fulfilling or having fulfilled basic needs for young people, and then support our educators as well as school partners. We've extended our professional learning very early on beyond the school doors to include after school time, out of school time partners, before and after care, our community-based organizations, recognizing that this is not work that can be done alone. It really is community resilience work, but built on the pillars of understanding the underlying causes or the problem behaviors and symptoms that students might exhibit for their traumas, facilitating healthy relationships and connections with caring adults as protective factors, then collaborating with families and communities, as well as our mental health providers, so that we are able to wrap arms around kids and have those wraparound supports to help them do well in school as well as out of school. And then we want to build a repertoire of trauma responsive interventions, assessment practices, so that we're able to support kids and not just surviving their traumatic experiences, but moving on to experience post-traumatic growth and thriving ultimately. And to do that, we use our social and emotional skills, our social competence as a protective factor. And then most importantly, we want the data to tell the story. So we want to embed and utilize data within our multi-tiered systems so that we are able to make wise decisions about how to support young people and then facilitate educator well-being, educator self-care in that process to retain a healthy workforce. So this is a graphic that summarizes our state's framework for trauma-informed practices. And we begin with a level of awareness that focuses on the brain science of adversity so that we are understanding and acknowledging our own biases and trauma histories at the sensitive level, and then moving on in the responsive level to focus on responding with trauma-specific interventions, but also restoration and repair of relationships so that we can continue to cultivate that culture of care. At the informed level, we really look at systems and practices that enable or re-traumatize the folks that we serve. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so early on, I took on the task of mapping all of our professional learning opportunities, book studies, all of our non-academic work across the developmental framework. So we could look for systems gaps, but also in our practice of evaluating professional learning, we wanted to make sure we were filling or bridging those mindset gaps and documenting the shifts in mindset that need to take place as we are moving and becoming more compassionate in our interactions with youth. And so we capture this in a community resilience model that begins with a shared understanding of trauma and toxic stress, the value of protective factors like social and emotional learning, create a state of readiness through educator and community capacity building, and then bridging those cross-sector partner supports so that we have a fully engaged community to support children and youth. In order to have a thriving, a resilient student, we need a thriving community. And so with that in mind, we really have pushed to make sure that we have lots of cross-sector and cross-youth serving agency engagement. I do want to highlight that over the last year, we have seen, particularly the last 2 years, we have seen some disconnections due to social isolation during the pandemic. We have worked hard to address some of the disparities that we're recognizing in access to supports, and then have put a great deal of attention into creating systems for well-being and mental health and behavioral health support and recovery. A year ago, we also mapped all of the whole child initiatives taking place throughout the department, recognizing one, that this isn't work while I'm charged with leadership for the work, this isn't work that just sits in my hands. this is all of our responsibility to make sure that we are breaking down barriers, building strong relationships so that we can support the whole child. And the intent is to have alignment and coherence with all of our equity issues, equity initiatives, so that we make sure that students have access to what they need, and more importantly, that we are creating systems that support their needs throughout the school day, but also bridging the needs in the community and in the families and communities. We use a framework to our Regulation 508 for the launch of the MTSS framework for this past July, really embeds data, systems, and practices to support strong positive outcomes. And again, not wanting this work to sit on a shelf, I've worked hard to make sure that there was some sustainability by connecting all of our social and emotional and behavioral well-being work to our MTSS regulation. And so you see here, our new MTSS graphic went into effect July 1, but really encompasses all of our systems, data, and practices within the multi-tiered supports within that whole child framework, really bridging what we see as best practice between our CDC's medical model, but also within our schools. And so that work begins with offering, because we know that all of our schools tend to be at different places. They have some autonomy and have invested differently within various districts. So the supports that we offer at level 1 allow them to explore all of the resources and learning opportunities, particularly within our whole child community of practice. And then when they're ready to move into deeper levels of installation and implementation, we have some guided professional learning as well as job embedded coaching through the Delaware PBS project. All of the supports that we offer related to professional learning are organized just like the brain is organized. So the brain is organized neurosequentially, and so our supports are organized bottom up. So we begin by focusing on regulation and how we are able to, as regulated adults, provide co-regulation for students. We build from there to create strong relationships and a sense of belonging and engagement. And at the upper regions of the brain, prefrontal cortex, we're focused on reasoning and problem solving. This is another graphic. One of our earliest, more foundational activities is the brain architecture game. And there's a picture there of some of our educators participating in that and the various thought processes, ways of interacting, and how they correspond to the brain that we talk about throughout that particular activity. But there are so many others, and we really have, I think, a strong foundation using the brain architecture game. From there, we move into some of our deeper work, embedding SAMHSA's 4Rs, so that we use that brain science, as I explained before, to talk about the intersections of inequality related to trauma, exploring our own assumptions and biases, and then recognizing the power of regulation. We want our educators to be thermostats, not thermometers, really creating systems of care and support for youth. And that enables us to respond in ways that build teacher self-regulation, focus on student strengths and positive childhood experiences so that we cultivate those protective factors that allow them to stay engaged, build strong relationships with peers and adults, but also learn and thrive in school and in the community. Our mindfulness-based stress reduction work is built in as a part of one of our SEL universal strategies. Mindfulness allows us to create physically, psychologically, and emotionally safe environments so that students and adults can have strong relationships, but also practice in a natural setting their social and emotional skills. We also know that learning is social and emotional. So since December of 2018, we have worked with CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, as one of CASEL's collaborating states. And in that work, we, January 2020, released our K-12 SEL competencies, making sure that they were aligned with all of the great work that had been done to embed SEL standards in preschools. We also, just last year, with support from Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development Work Group, crosswalked all of the K-12 SEL competencies with the academic content standards and created toolkits for implementation in schools. All of this work is done by the Delaware SEL Collaborative. That work, again, was grassroots work, teacher-driven. We have about 65 educators that and community members who get together monthly for the last couple of years to work on those tasks. We also have quarterly convenings in the months of January, April, July, and October, where we report out in a public meeting setting on the milestones that have been achieved through that work, and then offer opportunities for deeper collaboration. Much of our universal work has focused on reframing to focus on assets. I include this picture. I love this. I include it in a lot of my trainings because often people will see this and at first glance, it does, I agree, look a little chaotic, but in our reframing for assets, we try to help in a mindful, non-judgmental way, spotlight and reinforce that this is a mom who has social connections. She's literate because her hand is on a book. There's electricity and resources in the home because we do see that there's food and there are cleaning products. And with that, we are called to meet people where they are and recognize that everybody has strengths and we can build from there. And so that's a real foundational principle in the work that we're doing. We also have focused a lot over the last year in working with Adrian's group to build a strategy to monitor progress across our LEAs. And so we've taken all of the information from the professional development management system and actually coded all of our non-academic professional learning so that we are able to track at the district, school, and even educator level how much folks have participated in our non-academic learning opportunities. And so you'll see here some of the monitoring for growth that takes place. We've coded courses based on where they fall on the state's developmental framework. So the very first column that you see here is a summary of the awareness trainings that particular LEAs have participated in Newcastle County. The second column is the courses at the sensitive level, and then the responsive level is the third column, with the fourth column totaling all of the educators who participated. What's really important to think about is this is work that began in the fall of 2018. We had our first training for district LEA trainers in summer 2019. And every year we've tried to layer in another level of, a deeper level for our trauma-informed developmental framework. And so that's why what I see when I look at this is that awareness column really giving, punctuating that we've got some saturation at the awareness level, and then moving into some deeper learnings when it comes to sensitivity in our culturally responsive work, as well as our trauma responsive educational practices work. I will also go through with you some of the other supports that are available that really enable us to expand this work. And one of them is at our tier 2 support. Is a tier 2 support called Project Delaware. And Project Delaware is a SAMHSA funded initiative. It is available in 3 districts, Colonial, Capital, and Indian River, 1 in each county. And the learnings from Project Delaware over the last 3 to 4 years have really created a bit of a pilot to prototype atmosphere for some of the interventions that we are using in our multi-tiered system. There's also a big focus on reducing the stigma to accessing mental health. And so these are some of the graphics that you'll see in all of our schools. Project Delaware has been able to make those graphics available throughout the state. We also have funding from the U.S. Department of Education for Project Thrive, and I'm the project director for Project Thrive. And we've had this 5-year, $7.5 million grant since August of 2019, and it allows us to contract directly with mental health providers to offer trauma-specific interventions for students who've experienced trauma and adversity in our public, private, and even our homeschool environments. What's unique about the Delaware grant is that there is no requirement for a diagnosis of PTSD. So young people who've experienced community violence over the course of the last year, the COVID-19 pandemic, racial reckoning, all of those would qualify a young person for, or make a young person eligible for Thrive support. Our Thrive funding has also provided a multidisciplinary training institute that's allowed us to fold in the many trainings that we've had over the course of the last 3 or so years. We've also used some of our learnings from Thrive and to revamp our assessments, particularly when it comes to folding in assessments for protective factors. As said previously, we don't just want to focus on the adverse experiences, but also support resilience and a flourishing environment in our schools and communities. And to do that, we want to advocate for strong relationships at home and at school, but also recognize that all it takes is the support of one positive adult interaction to change the trajectory of a young person. So we are using these tools to support and further that work. We have a trauma recovery toolkit, a playbook for our schools and communities. We also have a number of print materials and digital communication tools that we use to support the Thrive work. One of the outcries from our LEAs is that when young people are engaged in services, mental health services, behavioral health services outside of school, we wanted to strengthen relationships and support parents in sharing that information in the school environment so we could all get on the same page and make sure we were supporting kids properly when they transition back. This is a tool that was created by with support from Nemours and a number of district partners, and we've made that available throughout the state as well. We're able to customize it specific to the LEA that is sharing it. And so very quickly, if I have time, is it okay? All right, I want to just share one of our many videos. We have all of our resources are available on the department's website, but we also just this past year launched the department launched an outward-facing website called Digital Delaware that houses a number of resources. And under the Whole Child Development tile, you can access resources related to trauma, social and emotional learning, as well as well-being and self-care. And so this is one of the communication tools that was developed for Project Thrive. And hold tight, let's make sure you all can hear it. Can you hear that?
I love school, but some days are better than others. When I struggle, it really makes my mother work.
Did I get a thumbs up? Are you able to hear that? You are able.
I can hear it, yep.
Sometimes I don't know how to explain the way I feel. My mother heard about Project Thrive and she dialed Delaware 211. Project Thrive connects students and families with a local network of professional mental health providers. Families select a provider of choice and Thrive supports those providers. Project Thrive envisions a Delaware where children are thriving and kids like me are a part of a community that has the physical, psychological, and emotional safety to make me feel like I belong in school. Project Thrive is for any student in a Delaware public or private school who is struggling because of trauma or toxic stress. The program provides access to professional mental health services. I love school, and now I'm thriving every day. For more information about Project Thrive, dial the 211.
Great. All right, so I'll stop here and respond to any questions that you might have. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you all the great work that's taking place throughout the state. And I look forward to collaborating more deeply.
Terry, thank you very much. Do any members of the work group have questions for Dr. Lawler?
I'll start us off. I have first of all, thank you, Dr. Lawler. I have a couple of questions. I'll start with I won't give you all at the same time, but I started out. I'm thinking about the expansion of the work beyond educators into the community. So I have but still staying within the ecosystem of the education. Are elected school board members that set policy and enforce codes of conduct that when it's the higher level offenses, or have they had any training to any degree?
Yes, absolutely. And so early on, it was clear that one person couldn't do this work. Okay. And so June of 2019, we had our first training for trainers. And we have done it every summer since. We also, in partnership with the kids department, I offered a training for community trainers. And with that, all of our trainers are charged with going back into their organizations, creating a strategic plan for how they will expand the work, the awareness work within their organizations, but also for our school partners, train their boards. And so one of the very first boards to get trained in summer of June 2019 was the Red Clay School Board. But all of our training cadres make sure that that work is made available to partners but particularly school boards, because when it's time to think about funding and supports and referendums, we shouldn't have to go back and express to people why this is important. And we want to lay that foundation early on.
Thank you. Does that include school resource officers and law enforcement people?
Yes, the educator means everybody. And we also, when thinking about well-being, we also make sure that they have the Headspace app. They've had the Headspace app subscriptions since the summer of 2019. again, our work is focused on, understanding how the brain works. And so we want people to understand that when it's time to de-escalate, you need to be regulated yourself so that you can co-regulate and spread that calm with whomever you're working with. This past fall, September 8th and 9th, we hosted in partnership with Delaware State Police and the Kids Department. Becky Haas presented trauma-informed policing. It was a 2-day training, and we had a train the trainer from that. So again, creating a mechanism to build and continue to sustain the work by having cadres, small groups of job-specific trainers who can make sure that they're recycling information, but also, as we're learning more, sharing those deeper learnings with the folks they work with.
Mhm. Thank you. So
Well, I had a comment and a question, related to, some of the behaviors that schools are seeing as we return back from the pandemic, from the virtual world. And then with the added layer of the academic pressure that teachers are feeling to recover learning from the virtual space. When I listen to your presentation, I think about how that learning really, it's very difficult to make it occur when the social emotional space of the students is not ready for it. And I know I see, and I see it in the schools and in the classrooms. There's the students are struggling, and it's not for the fact that they're trying to be difficult, but they're hurt. They're hurting, and they're confused, and they're angry. And that's just not even a kindergartner who doesn't want to tie their shoelace. We're talking juniors and seniors in high schools who normally are, generally speaking, an easygoing lot that just want to get by and, hey, be friends with the principal or the teacher. That we're seeing that I'm seeing that in the schools in Colonial. I'm not going to speak for other districts, but part of me, when I see your presentation, I saw Dawn Alexander put a comment in the chat about, like, this is not just, administrators, school boards, and school psychologists and counselors hearing and learning about the importance of trauma-informed practices. This is every person in the organization understanding it. So just a comment, but as I throw that back to you, Terry, I know you operate in a level of providing training and opportunities to share this. I just put that out there for the schools, the folks in the school's sake. And I do see Darrell is in attendance this evening, and I would love to hear his comment on that or thoughts on that if it were so, if he's feeling up to speak on that.
Thank you, Jeff, and Terry, as always, amazing work, and we appreciate all that you're doing to continue the efforts and keep just not the fact that we need to be trauma informed, but I think ultimately it's trauma invested, and that's ultimately where we get to. And Jeff, just to your point, I think, again, for us here in Red Clay, we recognize that we have to meet people where they are. Mm-hmm. And so the trauma of the pandemic, and as of last week, we've done some things here to remove a lot of the transactional and technical work that's on people's plates off their plates, right? And so things like PLCs, the professional learning communities, that was just an added burden on our educators right now, because learning is the connection between the teacher and the student. And if they're overburdened with meetings and kind of the bureaucracy of the day, and the effort of saying we're going to fill learning loss, I think we were selling ourselves short, because we see burnout as a result. We prioritize, and we're prioritizing observations for our administrators, because right now they're juggling schedules day to day to just try to keep schools open, let alone try to get in the classroom and conduct these observations. I mean, they're conducting them, but it's how do we prioritize that work to take the load off of them? And then more importantly for our students, really giving folks the opportunity just to engage. How does advisory periods look? What do we look like to make sure students have connections? Are we using available resources both in school, but more importantly, that after school and out of school time? How are we leveraging partnerships to really address this ongoing pandemic? Because I think with this latest wave, if a lot of our students are experiencing death and hospitalizations of loved ones. And to try to come back to school and focus on, an assessment when, they clearly haven't been, taught in a traditional manner. So we're to the point now in Red Clay where we're meeting folks where they are. And that's our mantra, and however we can use. And I spoke to Terry, I want to say right before break, to reinforce that we're putting out our multi-tier systems of support. How do we minimize isolation for students? How do we do all we can to try to keep our doors open? And unfortunately, in those instances where we shift to remote, what are the supports for students and families? Because again, our families are dealing with it. Every time we may have that threat of transitioning, that might mean that a family or parent would have to give up a job or quit a job to stay home. And that's traumatic in and of itself. So really being in tune to where we currently are with this pandemic and being realistic about how we can meet everybody's needs.
Well, I'd like to add something to that because, and Jeff, I know this is no surprise to you, but the time to get ready for a crisis is not in the middle of a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And so when thinking about this, I think we are doing as well as we are because this work started in 2018 and before, rather than us trying to roll out such a robust plan now. What I think is really also to our credit is that we, over the last year, sort of recalibrated and took a look at all of our supports, taking advantage of the fact that that new regulation was rolling out in July and making sure that we had a statewide infrastructure to support the work. And that's where the SCBW plan comes in. We have focused on creating cadres to sustain the training in the LEAs, but we've also within the department had work groups. Our transportation work group does a train the trainer for the transportation specialists. The nurses have a train the trainer for the nurses, for example. So making sure that all of our educators have access to this information, but also recognize that we all, whether you are in a classroom or responsible for a school, we all have a place for building a stronger community. And it's going to take all of us. Kids are going to do as well as the adults position around them. That's why we couldn't just focus on educators, right? We had to build in community support. Because to have a thriving child, you need a thriving community and a more resilient adult.
Thanks, Terry. And Darrell, thanks for, sharing and commenting on, Red Clay and the kinds of work that's going on in schools and districts. The reason I bring it up is I think about, there's a certain element of, the community might think that, learning loss is going to be, hey, we got to get on that. What do the scores look like tomorrow? Because, we're as we talk, I'm looking at emails coming in about the NAEP assessment that's being administered now and the pressures of the accountability and the achievement continue to march on. And that's why I think there is a certain element of the trauma-informed practices are going to be more valuable than ever in this post-COVID, not even post, this ongoing COVID world. And I think all need to understand that, including the educators, because we teachers and counselors, sometimes we get wrapped up in that world as well. And we want to make sure we're actually tending to what we know is ultimately at the base level importance, which is what you presented this evening. So, I think that's kind of where I was going with it. I agree with you. This work's been going on. Thank God it's been going on. Thank God this foundation is there. This network of resources available for our staff. So that, I agree.
Hey, Jeff, one last point as it relates to educators. I think the other thing too that we're noticing is we can no longer tell people to take care of themselves.
Correct.
I think that's becoming part cliche in terms of this, promotion of self-care, because folks are finding it hard when they're not regulated to take care of themselves, right? And so we're adding actually additional stress when we tell folks to, just take care of yourself, go get some self-care. So acknowledging that, and I think again for us as a system is really looking at what are we adding to folks' plate, what can we take off? Because if I'm going to tell you to take care of yourself, I can't give you additional work and expect you to, make up for learning loss and learning gaps and really seeing it. And I see it firsthand. My wife being a high school educator. The burdens and pressures that are on our educators. So that adage of, self-care is becoming part cliche, especially as it relates to the pandemic, if we're not giving them the resources to take care of themselves.
Right.
Thanks,
Those
Charles.
are the systems and policies that you have to take a look at the informed level.
Yeah.
And it is ongoing. I don't see us as ever becoming trauma informed. This is evolving.
Right.
And we are becoming all the time. And so we have to continue to, address and respond to these questions as we become aware. But I do want to respond to a couple of things in the chat, just so people know.
Okay.
We have lots of opportunities, particularly through our whole child community of practice, to bring educators across all of our youth serving systems staff together, working on massaging some of this content together, and also recognizing and trying to figure out how all of the pieces of our school discipline improvement plan work together. And those 6 are trauma-informed practices, social and emotional learning, mindfulness, culturally responsive pedagogy, restorative practices, and equitable and just schools. We would love to have anyone who's interested come and join in that work. I can provide those dates to Haley. And as we have professional learning opportunities, collaborations, I do try to send them out. I did last year, and I'll continue to do that. But Dawn mentions in the chat too, that, these are trainings that we might at some point, I don't know if I can say that, but she has said, make sure that they're done on an annual basis so that educators are prepared, whether through our CPAC requirements, so that's something that we might want to think about too, or I'm sure this group is thinking about.
Terry, thanks so much for your time, the time you put into kind of putting this together on a pretty comprehensive scale. I want to take, while we're still on this topic, you brought up the topic of the systems that we have to analyze and look at and reflect on during this time as we're trying to make decisions. One of those systems is clearly the data. What does the data tell us about trauma-informed practices, whether it's like you talked about the professional development data that you have, but Dr. Peoples has been brought in to kind of bridge us to next month's meeting around data. But we'd like to hear Dr. Peoples' thoughts around the data as it sits in this trauma-informed space. Like, what are the things that would be on a dashboard, or should be on a dashboard, or can help us make better decisions as school leaders and as community leaders in this space? So Dr. Peoples, I'll kind of like segue over to you, because I know you do have some questions that you could respond to that were shared with you in advance, but I think I teed it up just about right.
Yes, you certainly have teed it up pretty well. So thank you very much for the invite. Happy to be here and to engage with you as well. Always happy to see some faces that I've engaged with over my career here at the department, including those I haven't seen in a while. Jeff, yours included, Dorrell, yours included. And so it's always good to reconnect, even during matters as important as this. So I'll start specifically with the questions that were posed by Haley to kind of give you a on the record, on the recording answer to those questions. The first of which were dealing with the startup steps to generating a public facing equity dashboard, and then what information is currently being collected or what data collection is planned since the last presentation I made last year, and then what data points should be analyzed above and beyond some of the outcomes data and teacher data that you guys are already aware of. I think I'll answer these questions in reverse order. As it relates to additional data points that should be analyzed, we certainly at the department have not started any new data collections since the pandemic started. in part to support Darrell's point, the focus has been all hands on deck and making sure that the students are getting what they need during this pandemic time because of course to extend a data collection opportunity would be to engage with LEAs and schools about collecting that data, and the timing of that just wouldn't be appropriate given where we are right now. So the department hasn't engaged in any new data collection points. So that is the answer to question 2. As it relates to question 3, yes, there are plenty of data elements, data points that should be considered as they relate to the inputs of education. Certainly, Dr. Lawler's work deals with one small aspect of the inputs into education, into learning, as it relates to the child's mindset and mind state, their ability to absorb the massive amounts of information that need to be absorbed to get a successful education. So those are data elements in the input realm that are certainly of interest, but not only around those things, but general food insecurity and other elements that deal with are the children as ready as they can be? Are the educators as ready as they can be when everybody enters into the physical or virtual space for education? The inputs have been a very largely untapped data collection source, primarily because a large amount of that is qualitative versus quantitative, and outcomes data is highly quantitative and easy, and therefore much easier to collect. But having said that, let me get back to question number 1, which is what I spent the most time typing bullets up on, as it relates to, what kind of thoughts should you have moving towards a dashboard to shed light on the situation that's happening in Wilmington for those students and what that looks like. So there's a couple of things that we want to mention, and then there's a brand new thing that I would also like to mention that I didn't have in my notes here, but I have been engaging with others around this topic, so I want to bring that to light today as well. So there's a Dr. Harris, I believe. I believe I saw his. There he is. There, Dr. Harrison.
Dr. Harrison.
Sorry, Harrison. Thank you very much. Of course, we met and had a very nice conversation about some of the things that UD could potentially be involved in and could do some research around, which then springboarded me into my initial conversation. So it always starts with the researchers, right? I think the first start on your dashboard is what is it that we actually want to show to the students. And you're going to have to work to translate anecdotal things into actual data points, because there are various ways to illustrate or show something that and experience happening in schools need to be translated into something that can be quantitatively shown on a dashboard. So working with researchers at the outset would be the beginning of trying to find out what metrics do you want to use on the dashboard. My advice or my caution to you would be, as you brainstorm those metrics, those numbers are going to climb quickly, and you're going to have to narrow your focus. Right? So let's say you have 50 metrics that you decide are really good ones that are backed with research in one way, shape, or form. Trying to release a dashboard with 50 metrics is probably over saturation. It could be overwhelming to your audience. And so you may want to scale that back and start with a certain percentage and then roll out. Let's say 20% of those or 10 to 15 metrics, and then roll your way forward from there. So start with the researchers and get a sense of what kind of metrics you want to show. I think you also going to want to have to make some hard decisions about what is the lowest level at which you want to show your data. Now, this is a conversation that we definitely had earlier last year, in that since this this dashboard is meant for the public, and since this dashboard will be showing education records of students, this dashboard is in the FERPA bullseye, right? For those who are supplying data for that dashboard. So if your lowest level of aggregation or your lowest level of summary is such that a lot of data is going to have to be redacted by law, then that could impact what it is that you decide to show. Okay, so you're going to, I've had conversations around doing things not by school district level, because that's not appropriate for what you're trying to do, but to focus on communities and neighborhoods. So that leads to zip codes, census tracts, and so on. Once you get down to that level, you could run into some data privacy issues. All of those things can be worked through, but you're going to have to, that's a very large administration effort to get the people in the community to agree to have their data be shown unredacted, and something that is going to have to be maintained. It could be an administrative concern to the weight of maintaining the dashboard, but something to consider. Third point would be, how many audiences do you plan to have? And will all the audiences do the same thing? So is this designed for parents only? Is it designed for parents and community leaders, parents, community leaders and researchers, parents, community leaders, researchers and educators? Are there things in your dashboard that one audience will do that the other ones will not do? All of these things kind of speak to the complexity of your system. And of course, complexity equals cost in some way. So you have to be mindful of that as well. I think you're going to, in my experience in building systems, it is good to see the potential system before you invest in building the potential system. And you'll be surprised at how much of an idea you can get by seeing mock-ups of a potential system. Right? So some whiteboarding sessions with your potential vendor to kind of get your ideas out into the ether and have them transcribed onto paper. Physical drawings or computer mock-ups of what your system could potentially look like would then spur some good analysis work on what's the best thing for your audience before you begin to invest in actually building the system. The later in your development process that you come up with a new idea, the more costly your system is going to be. Okay, so if I spend a week in PowerPoint or in, Adobe or Photoshop or any of those types of systems, just drawing your potential dashboard so that you can get a look at what visually am I going to see, what data is going to be displayed, how is it going to be displayed, what is it going to look like. If you make changes and mark those up with pens and pencils and email comments, it is much less expensive to redraw it than it would be to reprogram it. Okay, so the later in the development chain you come up with a new idea or with a change, the more expensive your system is going to be, and we want to try to avoid those things as much as possible. Second to last thing I want to do is talk about potential partnerships, right? So I have had conversations with numerous folks who are either interested in education, affected by education, or directing education, right? And they're all interested in doing something that's community focused, right? The one that most recently comes to mind is the most recent conversation I've had is with the United Way. United Way of Delaware is working with the Department of Health and Social Services, My Healthy Community site, which is a community-based site around health, and looking to expand it into education. So they've come to the Department of Education and asked lots of questions, similar questions to Roger, yours and my conversation that we had around, are some of these outcomes available by geography? Any other geography other than school district and school? And so as we have more and more of those conversations, DOE is investigating with more and more determinants, with determination to see how that data can become available. But if the United Way and the Department of Health and Social Services is about to build a community-based education site, I think it would be worth a minimum a conversation with the United Way to make sure that you guys are not duplicating efforts fully. We certainly understand that there are certain things you are trying to accomplish with may be different than what they're trying to accomplish, but the opportunity for partnership, at least around the data, may be something worthwhile. For the Department of Education to generate geography-based data for one organization and then have a second organization come to us and we generate geography-based data in a slightly different way for a second organization is not cost effective for the Department of Education, and it may be a duplication of effort that may be unnecessary, right? Or it could be that because both of these organizations have come to some sort of partnership on what it is that they're looking for, the department can then generate one set that can satisfy both folks, right? As opposed to generating two separate sets. So we just want to, I just wanted to, as a last point before I open it up for questions and discussion, there are some other things happening around you. There are folks that are like-minded with you and that they want to impact the community, not just the district and the school, but also the communities that these districts and schools serve. And so the opportunity for partnership, increased budget could be made available with some conversations moving forward. So I will stop there as my voice is beginning to get hoarse and open up for discussion.
So Dr. Peebles, that is fascinating information. I can tell you in the district world, we've begun a conversation amongst ourselves because we actually this year for the first time, the district, the Brandywine, Red Clay, Christina, Colonial, and Newcastle County Votech have made an agreement to share data around seniors. So we've been able to generate a data pool of all seniors who reside in the city of Wilmington. They attend a school in DSC, but the data will be shared across, like we're sharing our data right now so that advocates on the ground in the school are making more informed decisions around the community, not just the schools in which the students are in. Mm-hmm. One thing that's come from that, and I don't want to spoil the next month's conversation, but I'm going to invite Katie Semmel to join this conversation from DSC. She has, and I just got this right before the break, and I just also received another email from her yesterday around, she took those seniors that we've agreed to share data on, and she's done a historical data pull of their entire existence in school and used some very broad metrics like you described, because every system's a little different, to try to gather an image of what does a senior that lives in the city of Wilmington look like on their academic trajectory. And so for her, so Katie's the first person to say, I'm not an analyst. I'll pull the data, but I'm not going to analyze it. So before she pulled the data, she met with Nerman at UD to talk about what are the things that they would like the data to look like. So if they were to analyze this data, what could they tell us to help inform our decision? So this is different from a dashboard that's the public facing, but the data can help inform school districts and community organizations make better decisions around what support to provide in the real time, not post-mortem, not after the fact, like in the real time. So what looking forward to our next meeting would in February, that's the kind of part of the conversation I'd like to have, bringing her in, sharing those thoughts. The data that she has is a gigantic file, obviously. And, but I'm excited to hear what you said, because I feel like this is a little bit of that. We're playing with it before we say, well, this is what we want, because we don't really know what we want. We know we want to do something, and we have to like kind of scratch at the surface first. So I feel encouraged by what you're saying here, and hopeful that the next meeting we can get a little bit more traction around this data discussion. Because the last thing she sent me was a data sharing agreement for the Newcastle Chiefs that, to your point, someone with a legal degree probably needs to look at that. Like, Jeff members are excited about doing good and working hard. I love it. But someone with a legal degree needs to check a look at this thing to make sure that we're okay. So I think, I feel excited about the opportunity. Thank you so much for your insights. I'll turn it over to anybody else for questions, but I would kind of like to tease up the next conversation next month. So we have a few more minutes before we have to open up the floor to public comment. So does any other work group members have anything to add, questions, comments, or thoughts?
This is Roger. And I likewise appreciate everything that you're hearing. It really was just like causing my mind to expand. What makes the most sense in terms of a practical next step in order to have folk sit down and start to think about how would we visualize what this might look like? Because in my mind, if we could start to visualize the build, then we can also figure out like a core set of data that we're going to start with. And then if we are building something that is expandable over time, that we can improve on over time, then what would your suggestion be, or anyone else, about what makes the most sense even before we finalize every single data category, to start to visualize and create exactly what you're describing, which is some kind of like paper-based, whiteboard-based, screen-based design? What would you suggest for that?
So in my experience, and I've done this quite a few times in the systems that I've built, and pandemic situations notwithstanding, I like to get people in a room with a large whiteboard that are users of the system and say, day one, in your mind, what are you doing? What are you doing with the system? Not what are you looking at necessarily, but what are you doing with the system? And it's a very conversational exercise, right? The systems developer and the business analyst will then tease out from your conversations keywords that they're hearing as it relates to the users of the system, some of the data that they want to see, how you want to be able to interact with it, and so on. So Roger, you may say, hey, look, I am in a meeting with a few university professors. We're talking about some academic achievement going on in Wilmington. I just want to be able to pull up the dashboard on my phone. So I pull my phone out and I go to the site and I scroll, I hit a couple of buttons, and boom, what I see is a chart of X, whatever X is, right? So that lets me know, okay, this system needs to be mobile friendly. It lets me know, okay, the system is going to produce charts. Okay, it lets me know the system is going to be able to go down to a certain subgroup. Okay, and all of those things from a natural conversation, we just begin to tease out and put in a list over to the right-hand side about what the requirements of this system should be. Once you do that, you begin to group them together and say, okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 potential user groups. Do they need to be combined, or are they distinct? Okay, fine. I see 4 or 5 or 6 actions that we want to be able to do. Are these 6 actions associated with these 4 user groups? Or are there only certain actions associated with certain user groups and so on, right? So we begin to really have an organic conversation around what it is that you think you could see, right? And then in addition, because of the nature of this system, you're going to have a dive into, all right, what do you want to show the public of Wilmington? What do you want to show the users that are going to be using this system to help impact the educational outcomes and inputs in Wilmington? What do you want to show them? And again, this doesn't need to be in research terms. This is just very, casual conversational language. Then we will then begin to highlight things and say, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I want to be able to show test results. Okay, all right, we write down test results. Okay, that's great. Is there anything more that you want to show? Then you begin to drill down, right? And all of those things and kind of flesh it out. So it's a very organic process. You're going to need to get some kind of steering committee around this dashboard. And you're going to want to have that organic conversation. And you're going to want to allow enough room for all of the people on the committee to participate. So that may be 2 or 3 meetings, an hour a piece. It may be 1, 2 or 3 3-hour sessions. However it is that you want to organize it. Trust me, I've done it quite a few different ways. And so my next concrete step for you would be get yourself a steering committee for this dashboard and begin to talk through verbally what you think you want this system to do, and have a scribe that with the kind of skill set to then document what it is that you're talking about, and then turn that into drawings.
Great. Dr. Peebles, thanks so much. I mean, the data is the key to, I think, driving this work. And I think that having these conversations at this level, we're early on in a whiteboard without a whiteboard right here, right? I think that we're getting to, so I think that that's a great piece of advice. And I think your comments here tonight will help drive our planning and preparation for the meeting in February and possibly in March as ongoing dialogue and conversation. So
one last point I will make, Jeff, is that in these beginning conversations, you need to dream big. Okay, so do not put any restrictions or clamps on your dreams, and say, look, this is the best system that we can develop, and then let the limitations of what's available now begin to trim down what is reality for phase 1.
Okay.
Right? And then say, okay, these challenges we can't tackle today, so they become phase 2. How do we, because this is our dream, this is what we want. So how do we build out to our dream after reality begins to scale it back? So when you have these conversations, dream big, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, dreaming big later is much more expensive than dreaming big now.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. Dr. Peebles, thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
So that said, I think we're well prepared for a further conversation, maybe a lot more time and focus on that in the February meeting. We also are going to have a presentation from Yvette Santiago around a healthcare bill. And did we lose Haley for good? Or there she is. Haley, what's on our next slide, Haley?
She's back.
Okay.
I think it's just public comment is next.
Okay. So
Ray,
do you want to talk a little bit about our path forward?
Well, I think the Dr. Peebles has done an excellent job of laying out our next steps, and we have highlighted this work as a priority. An additional path forward step, our Reading co-chair, Matt Den, he had planned to join us, but his work schedule preempted him. We would like to invite DOE to come in at a subsequent meeting, not in February, because we need to have a working session. We don't need to keep adding extra meetings, but he wants DOE to come in and share of the LEAs that have been funded and the ECAP programs that have been funded based on the Reading Consortium recommendations.
Yeah.
How's it going? What is it that they want to share with us to inform the next legislative funding cycle?
Yep. Thanks, Ray.
And also for those that may not be aware, Governor Carney has added an additional $14 million in his fiscal budget for this fiscal year. $7 million will be designated for the Wilmington Learning Collaborative Concept,
Mhm.
and $7 million will go into the operating budget for Reading Consortium recommendations that were funded last year as one-time only funding. So that's a big
Mhm.
hit. I'm not going to say it's a home run. I think we might be on first base, maybe second base.
Oh. Definitely.
For the work that you all are doing. I also did not acknowledge Dr. Lawler as a member of this social determinants work group for the Reading Consortium. So she is not just a guest speaker, she is a member of this think tank.
Yep.
So
Great.
So we'll work with Matt and the appropriate representatives from DOE to get that update scheduled.
Yes.
February is absolutely a working session. We don't want you all to be silent. I'm flipping through the attendance here. So we'll send around some framing so that you can get your thoughts together in preparation for our February meeting.
Yeah. Maybe we could even experiment and maybe test Haley's technology skills. We'll maybe try like a Jamboard or one of those, the kind of a virtual whiteboard where you can put Post-its and stickies right on the computer. We'll do some small group gathering, little a la data, the visual that Dr. Peoples is talking about. I think we definitely have an opportunity to have a pretty dynamic session around that, Ray.
Okay. And if anyone wants to be on a steering committee specifically around the public facing equity dashboard, you can let Jeff and I know.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know if we have anyone that's interested in making public comment.
Did anybody chat you, Haley?
Did somebody raise their hand? Oh, great.
I don't think so.
Nope, I didn't see anybody. I didn't get any comments either.
I don't think there's anybody. Darrell was public comment. Is there anybody? Dr. Howard, I think, will be public. Everybody else is part of the work group. And Kim Klein. Kim, I think, is still on the call. And
Yep.
VJ Leonard. Here we go. So if anybody has any comments, now is the opportunity. Otherwise, the meeting is adjourned.